Few days ago, I received a request to talk about one of the African companies that wasn't GoviX. So today, I'm going to share my thoughts on Paladin Energy. Okay, so why Paladin? Well, the four projects in Africa that I'm most familiar with, unless I'm forgetting something significant, are, well, four companies are Deep Yellow, which is a $90 million exploration company in Namibia. So that's a bit expensive in my opinion for an exploration. Yeah, they do have 100+ million pounds, but of low grade in Namibia, so eh. Next there's Forces, which is a $24 million project with a net present value of 383 million at $65 uranium, but it's unbuilt and it has north of 33 to $35 OPEX. So that's what they're paying once they have it built, which is not exactly uh, enticing to me. Then it could do spectacularly later in a bull market if we get that far. And next there's GoviX, which is a few, 2 to 3, depending on your permitting phase and all the tax code issues, which they're going to try to be a first mover, but they're already 42 million. And then there's Paladin, which for 225 million, the current price would get you 2 built mines plus 3 or 4 other projects. Now, I believe when most people think of Paladin after the last bull market, where it ran from 1 cent to almost $10, they think of this. They think of explosive upside and crazy potential upside and momentum, stock going from basically nowhere to basically infinity very quickly, making tons of money. So I think that's what most people think of when they hear Paladin. But for me, that's not Paladin. For me, this is Paladin. Company that's been moving sideways ever since they issued a bunch of equity to reduce their debt, shut down their mines, and now are just waiting for the uranium price to come back online. Going up pretty much nowhere, slowly, nowhere quickly, same difference. They are, and I am, waiting on the uranium price to increase so they may turn from being worth basically nothing to potentially something. Please note that although this is not a solicitation to buy any shares of Paladin, um, if you were going to, I would particularly wait for it to go closer to the bottom of this little trading range that it seems to have established, as this thing does jump up and down like 10% almost daily. So if you were going to buy some, I would recommend waiting for the bottom of the range. That being said, I'm not necessarily recommending buying this. Now, for me, what I'm most interested in Paladin is their 75% owned Langer Heinrich mine. Now, it was producing 5.2 million pounds per year before it shut down, but it does have potential to be increased to phase 4, which was 10 million pounds per year. Now, they do only own 75% of that, but before it shut down, they managed to get their all-in costs to about 30. I would probably assume they're potentially a bit higher than that. And for me, if you just look and assume all other assets aside from their idle mines are worth zero, find a price that fits their present cash flow, and it just it seems like at present they're valued at a lower end uranium price at basically one of their mines being shut down. So in other words, the way I like to look at it is let's assume a $50 uranium price and then um, from there, 75% of the 5.2 million pounds that it would produce would be 3.9, giving it $58.5 million a year in free cash flow. And if you give a 5 times multiple to that, 5 times free cash flow, it's 292 million, which is slightly higher than the current valuation, being at the top of its range down here, or before it opened the mine. Now, then you have another idled mine plus a bunch of projects for your real value increase catalysts. Now, I've seen some talk around that due to its massive resource base, north of 300 million pounds in reserves, that at the peak of the last bull, it was valued at half of what Cameco is valued. And I mean, that in some ways makes sense because it has half the reserves, slightly more, and slightly more than half, but slightly lower quality assets, so it could balance out in theory. I've seen that as a bullish case for what some people are predicting. And why I think that's unlikely is because Cameco has lower cost assets and Cameco can produce more. And if you take two variables, and you can read through my little math on this slide, it becomes two variables that both increase faster for one side than the other. You get something that's hard to catch, even hard to catch at 50%. In this little case here, I show why a company with half the costs of another, even if they produce the same amount, it requires higher prices due to leverage to catch up. And if the company with lower costs produces even more, it just accelerates the price that is needed for them to be equal value. Now, Paladin does have 120 million in debt due in 2023, but I don't think that's going to be a huge issue because I think they already have the mine, so if they manage to start it up by 2020, let's say, then you have 3 years at maybe $10 a pound profit. Mining 3.9 million pounds is 117 million. So I don't think that's necessarily a huge issue. In addition, they have $50 million cash, so I don't think the debt is going to be what gets them. And one thing I think it's important to point out is I heard somewhere, and I can't seem to find the research to back this up, but I believe it's correct, that Australia has a cap of I believe it's 4 uranium mines that could be active at any given time for whatever reason. And while there are 3 in existence right now, 3 of Paladin's projects are in Australia, and I know Laramide has a project in Australia, as does Vimy. Now, Ranger is coming offline soon, so that would be 2, but my point is mainly that there's a few candidates vying for the open spot. So one thing I like to look at for all plays and having a potential idea of where they might be is if you look at $65, so where's my initial target for where the price of uranium may go, you look at Langer Heinrich, they own 75%, Cameco, the other idle mine, so that's between the two of them is 7 million pounds per year. If they have $25 margin, then that's 175 million in free cash flow per year. And if you look at Mount Isa, which is their bigger Australian project, could maybe be producing 5 million pounds a year. It's not up yet. Let's give it a $15 a pound margin potentially. That may be a bit on the low end, but let's just say. And so then that's another 75 million. They do have other projects, but I'm not really going to count them. And so theoretically, at a 5 times free cash flow, you get 1.25 billion or 6 times higher from here, which is not fantastic given risks and all. But if you look at their 2 built mines is basically 66% of this uh, calculation. Now, one hidden risk that I believe it's important to be cognizant of is in the past, they did have a system, I don't remember the specifics, but I remember reading about it, where they were selling the uranium in such a way that allowed them to pay less or dodge part of local taxes. Similarly, but a bit different to what Cameco was doing recently, and they got a bit of an issue with. But seeing as Paladin did this in Africa, and there are some places in Africa that have a history of changing the tax code and to the detriment of miners. I think that because they were evading the tax code in this way, it may prompt uh, or increase the likelihood of something like this happening. Now, in conclusion, I want to be clear. I don't think this thing will probably ever get back to $10 a share. I mean, that's a long time, but definitely or probably in this bull market, I don't predict it going back to $10 a share. It has many more shares now, so it would require a much more insane valuation. Now, let's say there is a decent bull market and Cameco doubles and Paladin gets to half of what Cameco is worth or will be worth. That would indicate $2.73 a share in US for Paladin, which is slightly over 20 times upside from here. So basically, even though I'm skeptical that it will reach that because of a number of factors, there's some decent possibility between the 6 times that I mentioned and the 20 times that it has historically reached. So everyone, thanks for watching. I'm interested in knowing what your thoughts are on Paladin or what your favorite pick is in the Africa region, if you have one. I have a few more on my list, a few more names that I'm going to cover. But if you want me to add one to my list, please let me know in the comments. But until next time, have a nice day, and catch you later.